Hi everyone, it's Stephanie again, and you are tuned in to the review of Married at First Sight, Season 7, Episode 4. Happy Hump Day. So let's just jump right into it. Last night's episode was definitely one that still has kept us wondering. Last week's episode ended with me and Tristan, Mia being detained at the airport and Tristan kind of sitting on a conveyor belt trying to figure out what's going on. And so this episode picks up with them as well. And their whole storyline for this episode sticks around with what's going on with Mia. They don't get to honeymoon like the other two. I don't know if they get to in the future, but I doubt it. Throughout the whole episode, we find Tristan kind of still trying to figure things out. And I'll just kick it off with them because usually I save like the juicy stuff for last, but I want to start with them because clearly we've all been talking about it for a couple of weeks. He spends the majority of the episode not knowing what's going on. He has to go back to the hotel room. The production doesn't really know what's going on. All of this stuff ends up being very last minute. Production and, some of the cast and some of the experts are really, really like heartbroken for him. Of course, they're kind of trying to scurry around and figure out what's going on because that should have been something, in the perfect world that comes up on their radar. But it didn't. And so towards the end of the episode, one of the producers goes into the hotel room and talks to Tristan about how these charges came up the day after they did their full background report. So for everybody who's saying, how could they have missed that? Well, they do a full background report. They're required to do that. But just as, fate, I guess, would have it for Mia, because she kind of like skirted by without this, her, whatever those charges were, came the day after they did their full report. So apparently they did do their due diligence. Tristan was like you can tell that he's trying to be open about what's going on, but he knows that something is really wrong. No one is telling him anything. So when the executive producer gets there, they talk about what his options are. Everybody's super supportive. We're willing to do whatever you would like to do. We just want to make sure you're good. And they bring a copy of the report. At this point, Mia has been detained for about 2 days. So they bring a copy of the report. As I said last week, because I had seen an article about it, there was the 3 counts of stalking as well as the additional count of like credit card fraud or something like that. So he's sitting there dumbfounded, as we all would be, and is kind of thinking, what did I get myself into? And this is the worst case scenario, and doesn't really know what to believe. And you can tell that there is a part of him that just doesn't want to believe it. The person that he's gotten to know, which I think is like, it's cute to say, but you don't really know people in 2 days. But the person that he's gotten to know is clearly not this person who can have stalking charges and stuff, things of that nature. So he's in a tough place because he's saying, okay, I really want to talk to her. I still am open to kind of discussing what's going on. Towards the very end of the episode, Mia gets, out of jail, and she gets released into her room. I forget which one of the experts she talks to. Oh, Pastor Cal. She talks to Pastor Cal. He basically says, here's what we found. Tristan has a copy of this. So, and you can see her face change because it's like, oh, she probably wanted to talk to him before he was able to see something. And he basically, Pastor Cal, which I love, is like a straight shooter. He's like, essentially, did these things happen? Like, what's going on? I think Dr. Pepper was on the phone as well, and they were both elated because she said that none of it was true. So they were both elated to find that none of it's true and the charges have been dropped and so on and so forth. So when she walks in to see Tristan, she immediately runs into him and says, I miss you. And they have this super cute, cuddly moment. And, they sit down and they talk about what's going on. I'll say what she said and how that dynamic went before I share what I thought. So they sit down on the couch, and she's, like, hey, I want to see the report. And so he shows it to her, and that's where things get like really uncomfortable. At least it did for me, because like something was not right. He asked her, were these true? Essentially, and he was like, she said 100% false. And he's asking like appropriate questions, but he's kind of tiptoeing around it. And he's saying, why would this guy do that? Do you know this guy? And she says, no. And then at first she says no. And then immediately is like, well, I know of him. So right there, her body language to me is like, liar, liar, pants on fire, like entire body on fire. Like you either know him or you don't. There's not I don't know him at all, and then, I've heard of him, so that rubs me the wrong way. And you can tell Tristan is kind of like, okay, and so he says, why would he do this? And she just looks at him like, crazy people do these things. And he's kind of like doing the slow nod, but it's like, okay, like, I want to believe you. And she says, well, the charges are dropped. So that means, the charges wouldn't have been dropped if, these things were real, and so on and so forth. Not to be a pessimist, but I'm more of a realist. There's a lot of reasons why those charges could have been dropped. We know that the system is not flawless, so there's a lot of ways she could have gotten out of jail and not, had to, serve any more time or pay anything at that moment. There's a lot of ways. And I hate to be that person, because I don't have like a thing against her, but the way that she like initially lied about not knowing the guy is very uneasy for me. And her body language is very uneasy. So I like to say that I like to hear what's not being said and see what's not being shown. I think that that's my gift. And so when I'm watching her, I'm like, there's something else going on here, and she doesn't want to talk about it yet, or maybe she's hoping that it goes away and she never really has to talk about it. But what I saw last night to me is not really indicative of the truth, and I'm kind of holding my breath, waiting to see if something develops in the future regarding this, because something isn't right. And Tristan knows that, but he kind of goes for the okie doke. He's like so happy to just have his wife, because he's just wrapped up in having a wife, and 3 days ago we just got married, and this is not the person I know. And I'm like, you don't know her, but and none of them really know each other, but it's kind of like he's just hoping that this stuff goes away as well. So I was really wanting him to dive into some more questions. There's no time like the present. And I think Pastor Cal on the phone with Mia said it in such a beautiful, positive way. When he told her that Tristan already had the copy of the report, and you saw her face like cringe a little bit, he said, this is the perfect, springboard, something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing, but this is the perfect springboard for like full transparency, which is like, what a wonderful way to like spin that. No, this is not how you want to start off your marriage. This is not a conversation maybe you're ready to have. We're still in this phase where we only want to show the pretty side of ourselves. But girl, the jig is up with not even being able to go to your, honeymoon. So he said this is the perfect time to kind of illustrate what's going on and what has been going on. So that's super important for them to really go through. And I feel like Tristan missed the mark, and it would have been he would have had every right to really kind of dive in and just say, hey, let's talk about this, even though it's like really uncomfortable. Let's talk about what this means and why this even, came about. Is this somebody you dated, you went on a date with, something? So we leave them at the end of the episode jumping into bed and, laughing and just happy that this is all over. So we shall see. I don't have an opinion on them that is based out of like any type of fact. Like this works really well for them. Right now it's very up in the air, so I'm just gonna like see what happens, as we all do with these couples, but especially them right now. I definitely want to see how they develop, and if they get to be a little more transparent with each other and kind of let go of that childish guard that they have, where everything's super funny and everything's very like childlike, even their mannerisms, and see them kind of get real, get adult, be transparent, and actually build something if something is there. So that is Mia and Tristan. Moving on to, let's see, Bobby and Danielle. So Bobby and Danielle coast along once again. I think that they are rooted in a lot of the same thing. One thing that did come up though, as they were getting ready and they went to the honeymoon and they were having a good time, they have very good energy together. They seem to appreciate each other. In some ways, Bobby seems like such a little boy to me. I don't know if it's because he looks so young, or, he really isn't that old anyways, but he just seems like a little boy to me, but then he'll say things like, wanting to be the head of the household and wanting a stay-at-home wife, and these things that are very rooted in older, more sedentary values. So they discussed that during the honeymoon, and when he asked, hey, my mom stayed home, my mom's mom stayed home, all the men in my family have kind of been this way, would you be open to staying at home and letting me just be the provider? you could tell that she's uneasy. And she says, you know, she said I would like shoot myself or something if I had to, you know, stay home with the kids all day. And she values her independence. She values her career. And so she doesn't really say anything at that moment, but she eventually brings it up later in the dinner. And I'm glad that she was able to do that because, you know, there's like no better time than like the present to kind of like address something that comes up. You know, it's harder to bring it back up, and we all do this. So it's like a great example of how we can do better in our relationships. If something comes up naturally, address it. If it's something that needs to be addressed, or if it's something that makes you uncomfortable or you don't agree with, because it's 10 times harder to like mull it over for a long period of time and then say, hey, you know, 2 weeks ago, and we're all guilty, myself included. But I've also gotten so much better at just saying it, because in that moment you can address it, you can move on, and it's not this big thing. So I'm glad that she was able to kind of quickly move back to that conversation and share that, you know, her career is important to her and she wanted to keep that. And he was able to see, hey, you know, I get that. And I know that, you know, 2018 is very different than where my parents grew up and my grandparents grew up, and people value different things, and we're a team. So it's good to see that flexibility. It's good to see him being open and understanding and kind of vibing with his wife. They meet with Amber and Dave because this was like a collective activity that they did. They went swimming in some lagoon or something like that. And both of them are afraid of heights, coincidentally, but Danielle is more afraid of heights. And so Bobby steps it up and says, you know, I am afraid of heights as well, but I wanted to make sure that she was safe and, you know, make sure that she can count on me. And so he kind of took that role of like, you know, leading and making sure that she was good. And eventually she said, you know what, let me just do this. This is like once in a time, you know, once in a moment of time. And let me just kind of jump in and essentially get over myself, which shows her flexibility and her willingness, you know, in her own time to kind of do different things and do new things. And they had a great experience. So they are going pretty well as well. And we'll watch them kind of matriculate as the season goes on. So we will end with Amber and Dave. So Amber and Dave, they have very good chemistry. You know, you can tell that they're really into each other. They end up consummating the marriage, so they're the first ones to consummate the marriage. Danielle and Bobby talked a lot about it, and they even played like a little game, which is showing great growth in that intimacy aspect. But Amber and Dave are the only ones who consummated the marriage, and they said that, you know, it was an enjoyable time and they're happy that they did it, and they have like very good chemistry. So that is going really well. The one thing with Amber and Dave is they have these kind of past situationships that get in the way. And so if you recall, she mentioned something about a guy at the gym, like literally she mentioned that, I think, right after they got married, when they were having champagne like by themselves, and I was like, oh, I hope this doesn't become a thing. Well, coincidentally, it's a bigger thing than we thought, and it's actually an old friend. She actually dated like an old friend of his. I don't know how close they are. I don't think he's like in his like real tight circle, but it is a friend nonetheless. And you know, the irony is that friend back in the day used to talk about Amber to Dave, but it was just kind of like talking about who you were dating. So it's just like a little too close for comfort. And he expresses that because she's frustrated that it's even a thing, even though nobody can control it. Everybody has a past, you know, you don't really know who you're going to meet next. So she doesn't take fault, but she is kind of obsessing about it, I think, which we all would, because you don't want it to mess up something that is no longer significant, or maybe was never that significant, to mess up something that you actually value. So he says, listen, this is uncomfortable for me. It's very uncomfortable. I really hate it. Like, he was very honest about like, this is not the ideal situation. But I'm going to do what I have to do. And, you know, I think they'll be able to move forward when they get back, as he sets boundaries, as she sets boundaries, and they make their relationship a priority and the respect of their relationship a priority. But he even said in the confessional that if he could change things, he would have never gotten involved, knowing that he would end up with her based on that history. So it is a bigger deal than we know, but he's willing to kind of just be mature and move on. I hope that they are able to do that. Other than that, I think they should, you know, move along quite nicely, and we'll see their quirks, because they both have quirks. They really do. He seems to be more flexible than she is, but I can see that there's probably some inflexibility somewhere that like really matters, and she might be able to be the anchor that like balances him in one way and vice versa, because we've already seen her quirks and we know that those are there as well. So that is episode 4. You know, hi to all my subscribers. I love chatting with all you guys. Please subscribe, click, and like this video. Let me know what you thought of this week, and I'll talk to you next week. Everybody have a great week.